And now, weighing in out of the blue corner, Josh the Pug Thompson. 100%. And on the other mic, he weighs in from the red corner, Big John McCarthy.
We decided we're not doing introductions anymore. Everyone knows who the hell you are. Everyone knows who the hell I am. So, Big John, Josh Thompson, but I just introduced us anyways.
You just did it. Just had to do it.
Look, what I have to do, though, is I have to sit here and talk to you about today. Let's talk about Twitter. Let's talk about you and Ariel Helwani. Let's talk about the Chuck and Tito 30 for 30. Let's talk about the text exchange or just the back and forth on Twitter or whatever it was. Big John, break it down to me. BJPenn.com had even posted like the whole Twitter beef or whatever it was. Just obviously Ariel's not part of this show, but I have you in front of me. Break it down. Tell me what irked you off so much for you to write a comment? Because this is not you. This is not you. You like to give people your opinion, but the way it ended up transpiring on Twitter. This is not the normal Big John McCarthy that I'm used to seeing.
I think I hurt Ariel's feelings. So
you wouldn't be the first one.
I don't think I am. And look, I did not. It was funny because I'm watching that 30 for 30. I was on the 30 for 30. I did the taping for him and stuff. And as I'm watching it, and I hear something that Ariel says that is the static line that Zuffa came up with long ago of Dana and Lorenzo sit there and talk about, we saw the UFC. We were going to the shows, and we saw this diamond in the rough, and we knew that, they were doing things right. They were running from regulation, and we knew that if we ran towards regulation, that was the way to get this sport growing. And that's a nice story, but it's bullshit. All right. And so when I heard Ariel say, when Zuffa bought it, they ran towards regulation. It pissed me off because this is a guy that I respect. I respect Ariel. He's done a lot in this sport. But, I'm just going to be flat out the way I look at it. He was in journalism college when I was in court trying to save the sport and the UFC. There's a lot of things that he has no idea that took place, and people that did things to help save the sport of MMA. And when you just validate, because Ariel has a huge following, and a lot of people respect his opinion, and I respect his opinion. And when he validates an absolute falsehood, a lie of, the old UFC was running from regulation, that was the John McCain, and then the new, better Zuffa comes in, and they ran towards regulation. Well, both of those are just not true. I'm not saying that Dana and Lorenzo did not try to continue towards working towards regulators to get, the MMA, the UFC, into more states. But I was first licensed as a referee back at UFC 15 in Mississippi. That was the first time I ever had to, fill out an application, the first time I had to pay money for a license to get licensed by a state athletic commission because they regulated the UFC. And the reason that happened, there's a long story behind it. But yes, the UFC was in trouble. There was a lot of people trying to shut it down. They had been taken off of cable. All right. And you had a guy named Leo Hendry who was in charge of the biggest cable company provider at the time, which was part of Time Warner, and it became Time Warner. But I actually went to a meeting in Denver, Colorado with him and presented him with the actual first set of real rules for the sport. And one of them, he was big into, you allow groin shots because we did. You allow headbutting. They don't allow that in boxing. So I brought him a complete, set. It was 18 fouls that were the rules of MMA. to try to get him to realize, hey, this is a real sport. We are looking at it like a real sport.
And this was before the
Fertittas.
This is before the Fertittas?
This is after UFC 14.
Okay.
And his statement at the time to Bob Meyerowitz, who was the owner of Semaphore, to me, and to Art Davey, who was kind of Bob's matchmaker at the time, the guy who actually was the founder of the UFC, was, look, you want to get back on cable, you have to get regulated. You have to have the state athletic commissions sanction. If you don't have that done, I cannot allow you on cable.
Yeah. So
the first thing that they started trying to do was find some place where they could start to get regulated. And Mississippi was the first one, and Iowa became them. And even before Zuffa was ever part of the picture, the UFC at 28 was in New Jersey. The state of New Jersey regulated it. So when you're sitting there saying that, what made it happen is they ran towards regulation, and that was what Zuffa did, when he said it, I'm looking at him saying, how does someone that is supposed to be a journalist, someone who's supposed to look for facts, someone that is supposed to actually get to the truth, how do you perpetuate that story? And I was wrong. I'm telling you, I know right now. I should have texted him. I didn't think about it. I do have his number. And I should have just texted him or called him and said, hey, man, you realize what you're saying there? But the first thing I could think of, well, he's on Twitter, and I know he'll be on it. And so I went to Twitter, and I gave the thing and saying, I can't believe someone that knowledgeable would put out that kind of statement. If you don't know, ask for the truth.
Yeah.
And he took it wrong. He took it like I was attacking him, and I wasn't trying to attack him. I'm just trying to get it to where the history has been, a lot of people have tried to rewrite the history of what really happened with the sport. Unfortunately for a lot of people, I'm still around. And I was there from the goddamn beginning. And they could all tell their stories any way they want. But I was there, and I know. And I know all the secrets. I know all the horrible things people did. And I don't talk about them because, hey, you know what? That's life. But when I have something and I'm watching it on ESPN, and yeah, Ariel works for ESPN. And yes, the ESPN carries the UFC, and I understand that. And this is not me being against the UFC. I'm not. I love the UFC. This is me being against someone perpetuating a myth. And that's where I got mad. So that was why I tweeted out. I didn't tweet out trying to attack him, but I think he took it that way.
I've had run-ins with Ariel several times, just me and myself, and he's confronted me several times about how, Josh, I know you don't like me, and it's like, no, Ariel, it has nothing to do with that. I think that there's a miscommunication between the fact that, when I don't like when you print something doesn't mean that I don't like you. And he has sometimes that kind of feel when you talk to him, that the feeling is that you have to, if you don't agree with what he's saying or what he writes about you or your opponent or your friends, then you automatically don't like him. And that's not true. I don't mind him. I don't mind him at all. I mean, I do understand, you have to be, I have learned to be cautious with what I talk to him about on his show or any other show that I've ever done with him. But to talk about what you're talking about, we see that now amongst all media, though. Would you be correct that it's good to be first and good to just write a retraction later on the back page so no one understands, because they're going to believe what I say the first time.
No one looks there.
No one looks on the back page. So and I'm not saying that he does that all the time, but it just so happened that you caught him doing it this time, or you know the history of it that he didn't know. He spoke.
He doesn't know the history. He wasn't there. And there's so many things, Josh, I don't talk about, but I know them all. I know where all the skeletons are. And I don't attack anyone, but there's reasons why Dana wants to have this story put forward. And I don't blame him. And I'm not saying he's a bad person for doing it. It's just that a lot of it's false. And it's a story that they came up with. It's his side that he wants to perpetuate. And the MMA media continues to perpetuate that because Dana has been able to control the MMA media. He did a fantastic job of scaring the hell out of him years ago, and he got rid of SureDog, made sure no SureDog reporters could be at a UFC, and all of these guys started sucking up to him, and oh, you know what? And anything he would say, that was gospel.
Yep.
They don't look into it. They don't check it out. They just take it for fact.
Yep.
And that's where I have a problem, and that's what I'm looking at. When I looked at that, I was like, you're because someone said something, you're just putting it back out there. And I have to admit, I don't know the context of everything that was, actually said by Ariel at that time when he was doing the videotaping of it, because obviously they're asking him a question, and they can edit things, and it can actually look one way when he was bringing it up another. So I'm not mad at him in any fashion. He then brought up, well, it was, the whole Mark, then, they brought in Mark Ratner, and it's like, dude, they brought Mark Ratner in 6 years later. Stop. Yeah. You have no idea what you're talking about. Again, you're showing me you don't know what really occurred. And so I have this thing about why is it that the truth is so hard for people to find out? There's people out there that know it. Ask them.
Do you feel that it is a couple things? He works for ESPN. UFC is part of ESPN, and he needs to provide. He needs to provide the talking points in which Dana has provided for all these years. And when he does that, you're just spewing really what the organization would like people to know about them.
That's
not
right.
From the beginning, but from when they took over and when the success started happening. What I did like, though, was that they painted the picture kind of after the fact that the UFC was dead in the sand kind of thing. It was one of those things. But then in the very beginning of the show, you have to recall, we had 80,000 pay-per-view buys. Then they had like 190 or something. And then they went to like 300,000 or something. That's insane.
Over 300.
Yeah, they had over 300. That's insane considering, and I'm going to give this, we've had current UFCs that I think it was the Stephen Thompson and Wonder Boy. They only did 180 or 104 something like that.
They've had recent ones that didn't break 100.
That's insane to me.
Yeah.
To me, that's insane. You have current, and I know that the model of pay-per-view is kind of dying. I'm not trying to compare the two oranges to apple. It's like I understand that. But at that time, you're talking about a relatively new sport that people just all of a sudden gravitated to. It wasn't like it was a shitty sport. They had a product, and they knew they had a product that they could sell. It was a matter of just doing, and I did understand. I saw parts of when I was watching the 30 for 30 and the Chuck and Tito 30 for 30. They were talking about parts where they were trying to get the regulations in certain places, and you had, like you said, John McCain.
Chuck, they brought up Chuck. Now, Tito Ortiz fought when there was no regulation for the UFC. His first fight, it was, I believe, UFC 13. That was his first fight against a guy named Wes Albrighton. Mm-hmm. All right. He didn't even get paid for it because he was a college athlete at the time, and he said he couldn't get paid. But Chuck Liddell's first fight was at UFC 17. That was a regulated show. I was licensed. He was licensed as a fighter. He fought a guy named Noe Hernandez from Iowa, and that's all regulated. So they're showing this whole thing about back when, Chuck was, brand new in the UFC. It was regulated then. It wasn't that, those people weren't running towards regulation, because those people were running towards regulation because it was the only way they could keep the sport alive. They knew it, and they were working at it. And that went all the way up. And I could tell you the dirty story that occurred in trying to get into Nevada. But, Lorenzo Fertitta bought the UFC. He was actually sitting on the Nevada State Athletic Commission just before that and would have voted on was it going to get legalized or not. You figure out what happened.
Yeah. And then he turned around and bought it.
Yep.
And shortly after, a couple of years later, Mark Ratner had left and started working for them.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it's almost, I feel, I'm not trying to. I guess I am kind of trying to put the two things. The Golden Snitch works for USADA, but for some reason,
name.
yeah, Brendan Schaub, the Golden Snitch works for USADA, but seems like everyone seems to think he works for the UFC. You know, it's kind of like that.
No, he does. He does work. He used to work, you know, with USADA. He works. Jeff Nowitzki works for the UFC now.
Okay.
He is the guy in charge of the USADA program for the UFC.
But he used to work for USADA.
Yes.
Makes
He's the guy that ended up catching Lance Armstrong. So Lance Armstrong and him have a very good relationship.
Well, what took him so long to catch Lance? What took him so long?
It's no different than what's occurring now. You know, the testing has gotten so much better.
Yeah.
And what they can do now with it, it's a different story, and it finally caught up to Lance.
Mm-hmm. So you're just upset over the fact that the facts weren't portrayed in the way that they should have been portrayed, and they were spoken by Ariel. The non-facts are spoken by Ariel. And when you reached out on Twitter to tell him that he was wrong, like researched a little bit more before you're a journalist. And to me, honestly, like I feel like even though despite I've had problems with him, he's always been pretty on point with the things that he does. And the fact that him and Dana had a falling out kind of made me like him a little bit more. So, so when he started, like, you know, I see things that he does, and I actually do like a lot, like his show. I do enjoy some of his other stuff, his articles that he had originally like started on doing. He's good. I do enjoy some of his content and his stuff.
I honestly believe, first off, he's a good guy. I like Ariel. You know, there is no animosity towards him at all. I like Ariel. I would do anything for him right now. I think he's a good reporter. Mm. You know, I think he's a great interviewer. He asks good questions. Mm-hmm. I just look and say, man, if you're going to be that guy, because he's been anointed as, you know, how many times has he won the Journalist of the Year award with the MMA awards and stuff? If you're going to be that guy, then make sure that the information that you know is right.
I mean, for Christ's sake, you work for ESPN and you represent our sport. You're basically the face of journalism for our sport. And
you're right. Like he was, you know, he's been on the other side of Dana. He got kicked out by Dana.
Yeah.
You know, do you remember what that was for?
No, I don't. Oh, for what?
Yeah. We were at UFC 199 and they were hiding the fact that Brock Lesnar was going to fight at UFC 200 and Ariel tweeted it out. And that sent Dana over the edge. And all of a sudden, Ariel was in the parking lot at the Forum in Inglewood, California, not allowed to come back in. and I feel bad for him because he lost a lot doing that.
I talked to some of my friends that work at ESPN also, and they were saying that Dana was actually trying to get him released from ESPN when they did the deal. He had requested.
He won't forget.
He had requested that. Do we have to have Ariel work and cover the sport with you guys or through you guys? And they had basically said, yeah, we have a contract with him. So, yeah, strange. Anyways, I mean, so you're not mad at him. You were just kind of upset you a little bit, and that's kind of how
I'm not mad at him. I just want the truth of what occurred to make the sport of MMA actually, you know, survive, to grow. You know, there's a lot of reasons why it did. And it went through a lot of hard times. The fact that the internet was brand new, that's why MMA survived. That was the thing that kept it going, because people could get on this computer and talk about the sport and say when it was going to be and all these different things. I'm not saying that regulation didn't make it grow. It did. But people kept the sport alive. It was the fans.
People need to understand how popular the underground forums were. Back then for MMA. I mean, hey, there's a fight in Calusa in Northern California, and people were like, what's that? It's a casino in the middle of bumfucked Egypt. You know, remember the
Eagle Mountain's got one. Yep.
You know what I mean? I mean, look at Lemoore. Lemore's in the middle of nowhere. So, I mean, like, you would hear about all these things on the underground forums, that were just publicly, you'd get over the internet. So yeah, I agree with you. I think the sport is alive a lot, mainly because of the internet, and yeah, I mean, you're right. I just feel like we live in a society now where people would rather be first than right, and they would rather write a retraction than be right the first time. And then a lot of the times when they work for a company, they become company people, which is fine. But the problem is they're spewing just the punchlines of just regurgitated punchlines for whatever company they're working for. And it's not factual. And that's upsetting, especially from someone that like Ariel Helwani, who's covered a lot of top fights. The Mayweather and Conor fight. I mean, the Khabib and Conor, like all these good top fights, and it's upsetting to see someone like him not do the research a little bit more to back up his information.
Yeah, but I just look at it. There's guys, there's people that other people forget about, and some of them they're gone from us now. They've died, but there were people that did a lot to help the sport of MMA actually survive.
Yeah.
And when you are changing the history of it, you are erasing those people and what they did. And that's what I can't stand for.
I 100% agree with you.